Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction.
See what the Empire has done to your lives? Your families and your freedom?
Good people will fight if we lead them.
The rebellion is spreading.
Now we take the war to them.
The Republic will be reorganized
Systems either change or die.
into the first.
You give way to an enemy this evil with this much power, and you condemn the galaxy to an eternity of submission.
To wake up, there is one way. Be fighting from the start.
Long live the Empire!
Fight the Empire!
Let's call it war.
Remember this. Try.
Hey, Sophie.
Hey, Eleanor.
What's the difference between a pod racer and a Republic senator?
One has 2 engines.
A pod racer discloses their corporate sponsors.
Rip.
Hello and oh my god, I didn't actually write an intro to the show. Hello and welcome to Daughters of Ferrix, a podcast about Star Wars and I guess women. We get to talk about a woman today. Thank God.
I love women.
A rarity in Star Wars. Quite the relief. I'm your host, Eleanor Mueller. With me is my co-host, Sophia Dunstan.
Sophia Dunstan, the better co-host.
The better co-host. Many people are saying this. Sophie, why are you the better co-host? Show your work.
Oh, I think I'm definitely not, since you do all the work for most of these, but like, I don't know. I'm funny and I say things about Juche sometimes.
You're the talent, right?
I'm the arm candy talent of the podcast.
I'm the brains, you're the beauty.
A beauty in like a funny way, right? Like it's not beauty as in like I'm actually more attractive than Eleanor. It's beauty as in like I'm funny.
Right, you're charismatic, you're likable.
Right.
The brains, the beauty, and we lack brawn because we're both on estrogen. So
oh dude, I'm finally discovering that this is a problem for me because like my fairly shitty HRT regimen doesn't do that much, but I'm struggling to lift my bicycle now and this is like a problem.
Oh my god, that's your livelihood.
I have to like start lifting so that I can like lift my bike, but it's hard.
Before we begin, if you want to become one of our non-corporate sponsors, you can support us over on Patreon.
Yeah, and if you want to become one of our corporate sponsors, you can email us at daughtersofferrixbusiness@gmail.com.
It's not daughters of, it's just daughtersferrixbusiness@gmail.com. Giving us your hard-earned money can get you early access to episodes, outtakes, the Daughters of Ferrix Discord server, and last month's late bonus episode where Sophie explains just how deeply silly trains in Star Wars are. I think it turned out really fun.
It was fun. I had a good time.
Check us out at patreon.com/daughtersofferrix. One more thing, I want to thank my beautiful girlfriend Adia, who came up with this topic in the first place. They pitched it to me a few months ago and helped research and write it. She is the biggest fan of the show that never listens, and this one wouldn't have happened without her.
No, I think I'm the biggest fan of the show that never listens.
Adia cares a lot more about this show and knows more about it than you do, Sophie.
Rude. Okay, fine.
So, Mon Mothma. You're familiar, Sophie.
Love her. Girl boss, queen.
You know, people have varying opinions on Mon Mothma and her approach to politics and all of this stuff. I think we can all agree on is that she looks pretty damn good. She wears these beautiful, subtle jackets and dresses. Her hair is perfectly styled. Her jewelry is elegant, but always feels right for the occasion. Whether it's her petrol blue coat that she wears as she petitions the Senate, or the champagne gold gown she dons to meet with Tay Kolma, I think it's safe to say that a lot of us take great pleasure in just how beautiful and striking her outfits are. And that also goes for the looks designed for her appearance in Revenge of the Sith. She's wearing these stately, almost royal white robes of pin-tucked silk or felted wool. She dresses like she's the most powerful person in the room, and she often is. In Star Wars, she publicly decries the Emperor, she condemns the Imperial machine, and goes into hiding as the governmental leader of the Rebel Alliance. As a person who's so important to the cause, who fights the good fight and bravely speaks as its figurehead, she probably looks pretty amazing, right? Right?
I think so. I mean, the thing is, I have no fashion sense because I pretty much exclusively wear like acid wash jeans and a crop top like 90% of the time.
That you do.
That is kind of my look. I don't know. I'm not like fashionable. My style is timeless. That's what my style is.
Sophie is less vain than I am. Mon Mothma doesn't look bad when she's with the Alliance. Not by any means. But Mon Mothma's outfit in Return of the Jedi and Rogue One is pretty silly. She wears this plain gray skirt over which goes a garment of gathered white fabric, almost like a judge's robe. From her shoulders hang silver cords and a simple medal that sits in the middle of her chest. She lacks earrings, she's wearing a pair of black flats, and her hair is styled in a round 80s pixie cut that looks like she went into a barber and asked for the simplest hairstyle possible. If we look at it chronologically, it sure feels like a bit of a downgrade on her part.
True. Like, she could have had, like, Princess Leia space buns, and instead she goes with this kind of, like, sort of professional pixie cut.
Well, I would never say kind words about the space buns, but that's just my own personal taste. It was a deliberate choice in Andor to break from Mon Mothma's traditional appearance, including the white sheet. Genevieve O'Reilly said multiple times that the key difference in Andor is that Mon Mothma is portrayed as a woman instead of her more, statuesque role in previous entries. A Variety article explains how, in order to depict Mon Mothma, the show's costume designer Michael Wilkinson looked at prominent people, including leading senators and United Nations members, keeping power dressing in mind. In The Mary Sue, Wilkinson explains that her outward public sense is this incredibly together senator. With her costumes, we tried to get a sense of layers. So she had the armor of her Senate robes and her more business looks, and then she had something a little bit softer when she peeled back the layers when she looked home. I love the way Mon Mothma looks. She's both a great character and a great dresser, and I want to talk about her outfits. Clothes are neat. You might not be able to tell it from my voice, but I'm a woman. I enjoy women's fashion.
Shut the fuck up. No.
But more than that, I want to talk about the ways in which women in powerful systems dress, how that's influenced, and what all of that can teach us about what lies underneath Mon Mothma's layers. And in order to do that, we have to talk about social systems. Specifically, we have to talk about patriarchy.
Bum, bum, bum. That's the only reaction I had to that.
Yeah, thank you.
It just feels like an appropriate thing. Patriarchy is like the evil guy that comes in like, oh no, it's Dr. Patriarchy in like a 70s Batman. Quick, Robin, smash the patriarchy.
Yeah, that's a Batman I'd watch. They made Batman woke.
They transed Batman.
Oh, God, if only. So, some of you in the audience might know what patriarchy actually is. I'm guessing more of you don't. It's really commonly used as a buzzword, like a punchline or a boogeyman, to basically signify feminist critique without any real understanding of the term. But the reason it's used in feminist critique is because it's a useful idea. If you feel defensive around the word, I ask you to put that aside so we can actually define our terms. Because patriarchy is not when men. Patriarchy is not even whenever men have power. A patriarchy is a type of society, a form of social order. It's reinforced by our actions and beliefs, but it's also bigger than us and can shape how we interact with the world. Patriarchy can be upheld by men, but it can also be reinforced by the actions of women who benefit within it.
Patriarchy is a social construct, is what she's saying.
It's a social plague? No, I don't know.
It's like a tapeworm, draining the vitality of society.
But a tapeworm the size of a city bus. I'll just let you think about that. Drawing on the book The Gender Knot by Alan G. Johnson, a society is patriarchal to the degree that it promotes male privilege by being male-dominated, male-identified, and male-centered. So, let's define those terms. A society is male-dominated when authority positions are, predominantly, the domain of men. Politicians, religious leaders, CEOs, legal authorities, even people in charge of domestic settings tend to be or are expected to be men. Think of how, in Andor, Director Dedra Meero attends a meeting at the ISB Central Office, wherein she and other supervisors report on conditions in their respective sectors. There are 19 people at that meeting, including Major Partagaz. 17 of those people are men.
Yeah, so basically, more female ISB officers is what we're really asking for here.
Right.
First of all, because we both, I think, agree that that was extremely attractive. And second of all, patriarchy, question mark?
Yeah, I think we should increase the size of the ISB by approximately like 60% in order to have the funding and the room for women's equality in the Empire. In A New Hope, the meeting of the Imperial Joint Chiefs is attended by 9 people. All of those people are men. Remember, in almost all cases, women make up about half of the population otherwise. But the Emperor is a man. The vast majority of his advisors are men. While we do have examples of women in imperial leadership, mostly in publishing, it is still clear that we can pretty easily understand the Galactic Empire as a male-dominated institution.
Yet another reason to cancel the Empire.
Yeah, what I'm not saying is that I think the Empire would be fixed if it had more women in it. It is still a fascist organization that abuses its power through authoritarian rule. The First Order isn't somehow better than the Empire because like a third of their leadership is women or whatever.
The reason the First Order lost so much more quickly than the Empire is because it went woke.
It's because they had women. That's why, the Empire is based and cool, and the First Order is cringe
and woke and soy.
The woke First Order. First Order does have more non-white people in it, so on screen.
Suspicious.
The point is that we see something obviously gendered in how the Empire's political power is distributed. As a second example, let's consider the United States federal government. There are 100 seats in the Senate, and 75 of them are occupied by men. 71% of the House of Representatives is male, and 38 of the 50 state governors are men. So it seems fair to say that the federal government is male-dominated. If this holds true for the majority of institutions, then we can also make this claim about society. Seems fair?
I'd say so.
This is not to say that every individual man holds greater status than any individual non-man. The Rebel Alliance is filled with men who have been harmed by the male-dominated empire. Owen Lars got killed just as much as Baru. Male domination almost always includes the dominion of men over other men, in addition to everyone else. The dominion of men over other men is my my most used Google search term.
Kind of kinky, isn't it? Yeah.
Next term. A patriarchal society is male identified. Now, this one's a little more abstract. It's not that the majority of people literally identify as men. The patterned button-up shirt industry would be a significantly bigger economic player if we had that many little trans masks running around. So a male-identified society is one which treats manhood as the default, where men's lives are the standard for what's considered normal. What our culture conceives of as core societal values, control, strength, cool-headedness, are basically synonymous with masculinity. To be powerful is to be manly. To be manly is to be powerful. Occupations that are associated with masculinity, like lawyers, senators, or doctors, tend to hold higher social regard and get paid significantly more than roles which are associated with feminine, quote-unquote, caring traits, even if those caring roles require the same or higher levels of skill or effort.
This is why transphobes can tell that I'm actually a biological male, and it's because I'm so powerful. I'm the vice president of 2 podcasts, and...
we don't have vices or presidents. This is a sheer monarchy.
Oh, it's a dual monarchy, right?
Sure. Sure it is. So, the gender knot points as an example to the widespread use of masculine terms to refer to people in the abstract. We call humanity man. When talking about hypotheticals or projecting gender on objects, many people default to he.
Yes, I do this.
I do this. I do this for cats. I call cats he by default. I also call my cat, who is female, he. So we're reclaiming he for the girls, I think. To quote Johnson, we construct a symbolic world in which men are in the foreground. When Ubisoft announced the game Star Wars Outlaws in 2023, a lot of people were really excited. This is an open world game where you get to run and gun through the galaxy's criminal element. That's something people have wanted vocally for at least a decade, and people loved the sexy droid in the trench coat from the trailer. But some other people weren't happy. And a big part of that was because the point of view character in the game is Kay Vess, a thief from the Canto Bight Workers District. What's objectionable about that? Well, Kay has the audacity of being a woman.
How dare she be a woman, not in my Star Wars.
And in order to enjoy the shooty space game, male players would have to willingly identify with a female. The replies to Star Wars' tweet announcing the game are filled with dudes angry about this fact. The first ever open world Star Wars game just had to be female-led. They complain about another generic girl lead. More subtle are the people demanding character creation. Can we create our own character? So why is there no character creator? If we're worried about equality, one could note that Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which starred a man, released the same year. The vast majority of Star Wars games historically feature a man as the default playable character, and the ones that allow you to play as a woman do so usually via character creators or in side modes. A great deal of Star Wars fans are women or other gender minorities, and we very quickly learn to identify with the men in the series. We see ourselves in Cal Kestis or Starkiller or Kyle Katarn. They're the default, so in order to engage with the larger counterculture culture, we see them as like to us, but many men don't do the same in reverse. They never have to. A woman in a role they'd have to empathize with and embody is aberrant and should be replaced.
Right, like Indiana Jones. I've always liked Indiana Jones a lot. I think it's a really fun like series, and I always do kind of like see myself in Indiana Jones, right? Like I like kind of the idea of myself as like, sort of like, I don't know, what kind of hat does he wear? Is it like a cowgirl or cowboy hat maybe? I don't know.
It's a fedora.
It
is a proper fedora.
It's a proper fedora. It's a big fedora. I like the idea of myself in a proper fedora wearing like rumpled clothes and like a satchel and just like going around in the desert looking for artifacts. I can like sort of project myself into that situation without being like, oh, I have to be a man to be Indiana Jones.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of my favorite characters are men, and a lot of the characters that I tend to see myself as like are men. And that has nothing to do with my gender. It has everything to do with the fact that men are everywhere in the media that I enjoy, you know?
Well, right. And like you're a normal human being who's able to identify with a story without being the exact same as the person in that story. Holy cow. Shocking.
Lastly, a patriarchal society is male-centered. The focus in that society is largely on men and what they do. News, books, television tend to highlight stories about men, what they think, what they have to say. If you're sitting on a couch and you want to watch a movie about heroism or moral strength or spiritual evolution, you're probably going to have to find it through portrayals of men and their actions. Johnson says that male experience is what patriarchal culture uses to represent human experience. And it's that matter of human representation that centralization highlights. If you watch a film starring a woman, it's much more likely to be about womanhood or women's issues, and it'll typically have significantly less mainstream appeal.
I mean, this is not a great example of something that has less mainstream appeal, but like Barbie might be the most popular movie about a woman ever.
Probably.
And what's it about? Women's issues. Shocking.
Historian Rebecca Harrison totaled together the amount of screen time taken up across the Star Wars films by women with speaking parts, and it's pretty abysmal. Only The Rise of Skywalker and The Last Jedi crack 40%, and the lowest two are Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope at 17% and 15%. And that's including most establishing and starfighter shots.
I just realized something about A New Hope that I never noticed before. There are no women fighter pilots in A New Hope, are there?
There are some that have been retconned in, but yeah, not in the film itself.
Maybe George Lucas should have remastered some women into his movie.
You know, it would have been one of the better improvements. Shame. As far as character screen time, the only characters to break the top 10 across their respective trilogies are Leia, Padme, and Rey. Remember, this means that of the top 10 character appearances in each trilogy, 9 of them are men. For the record, the woman who has the next most screen time in the original trilogy after Leia is Mon Mothma, with a piddling minute in Return of the Jedi.
Nice.
Women rarely, if ever, talk to one another in the films. They're more likely to have their agency removed by the plot. Books featuring women tend to be YA novels, which can often be about a character's identity and relationship to femininity, and less plot-focused. Adult flagship titles through the years have tended to focus on men and their relationships and struggles. I like a lot of these books, but they are what they are. So Star Wars, at least historically, has been male-centered as a series. Recent pushes and trends have helped this, and having more women in the writers' rooms has made a huge difference. I'm grateful for what improvement we've seen, but it's still a fact. You can see the ways in which these three ideas feed into one another. Men dominate powerful roles, and so power is understood as masculine. Masculinity is the centered norm, so people identify with it. None of these ideas are really separate. They're one single blob, and a society which exhibits these criteria is a patriarchal one. And that affects women. A lot. A society that's male-dominated is one where women hold less political or social power. To be male-centered is to necessarily marginalize women, their issues, their visibility in society, their rights. A society that is male-identified is one that treats womanhood as an aberration, at least when it doesn't exist for the pleasure and sake of men.
Yeah.
We love it. We love being male-identified.
I would know all about that.
I know a thing or two about male identification. I know a thing or two about unlearning male identification. You can see how useful the naming of patriarchy is in the struggle for women's liberation. Through much of history, men were kings and heads of households and whatever, and that dominion was naturalized into a trait that many saw as essential. This is where we get the deeply silly idea that men are naturally better leaders than women. We tend to culturally assume that supposedly masculine traits make for a good leader. A leader ought to be assertive, tough, decisive. But you could easily argue that many traditionally feminine traits are preferable in a leader. Compassion, team building, cooperation, intuition. Why shouldn't these things be seen as powerful? Mutuality is often how actual change happens in our world.
Well, and why do you think that compromise is such like a shocking thing when it happens, right?
Well, it's devalued. It is a trait that is seen as
Weak.
weak. In some ways, it's kind of arbitrary. The cookie has crumbled such that we live under a patriarchal social order, and it sucks. As I said earlier, just because patriarchies favor men doesn't mean all men benefit. Most do not. You might be lower class, in which case you may get fucked almost as much as the rest of us. You may be non-white or queer, and in social orders where those things disqualify you from certain types of masculinity, you'll be marginalized too. Patriarchy can even fuck up the people it squarely benefits. None of this stuff can be separated. But just like you can be a man and be on the bottom of the hierarchy, so too does a patriarchal system not mean that women can't ascend to the top. The United States does have many women in government.
Yeah, and that's how we got one of the best lines from a vice president of all time.
Are you talking about the coconut tree thing?
You didn't fall out of a coconut tree.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Great. But women in government are often seen as tokens, as exceptions to a typically masculine rule. The gender of male politicians only really comes up in the context of feminist discourse surrounding inequality. But when a woman takes power, the implicit question is if she'll perform as well as a man would. And that question, the scrutiny that comes alongside it, shapes the way we see those women and the ways they dress.
Personally, I think that all congressmen should be required to wear like a dress.
Congressman dress code, you have to wear a sundress. Getting railed in a sundress on the Congress floor.
Wow, Ellie.
Who was it? Where were they having sex? There was like a staffer that was
Oh, right. The gay staffer who
Yeah.
posted a video of himself getting, yeah.
more power. Genuinely?
It was in a hearing room.
Genuinely? Whatever. Nothing is sacred. I don't care. You can fuck on whatever governmental floor, you know, especially if no one's there. Whatever. I don't think it's tasteful.
My tax dollars paid for that floor, and I reserve the right
I
to.
reserve the right to. That's not going in the podcast. So, Mon Mothma's appearance is built on many ideas of how female politicians dress from our real world. So, let's get granular. Let's dissect the way a powerful woman looks. Shall we?
With our fashion scalpels.
Take our fashion vibro scalpel to the I don't know. Mon Mothma in Andor is beautiful, but one thing she isn't is particularly flashy. Her dress, her jewelry, and her hair are all simple, which fits into a pervasive, unspoken belief that female politicians need to not be distracting. There's this recurring theme when you get into reading about professional women's dress. The goal is to be unmemorable. For a lot of history, that would have just meant wearing whatever current trends and fashions said was appropriate, which might often mean a dress or a skirt. We have records of women wearing pants in the United States at least as far back as 1850. Trousers were seen as men's clothing, so it was a major disruption at that point. But, as legal scholar Richard Thompson Ford notes in his book Dress Code, women's fashion often adopts aspects of men's. Sometimes this is as a statement. Wearing men's styles can be seen as a declaration of a woman's right to the political, social, and individual power that men wield. But it can also be practical. If you're fighting in a war, you're probably going to wear the same clothing as the dudes. At this point in history, the year of our Lord, 2024, pants are extremely normal for people of any gender to wear.
Shocking.
Well, sort of. Women weren't allowed to wear pantsuits on the US Senate floor until 1993, and after that, women were regularly criticized for being too masculine when wearing them. During Hillary Clinton's failed bid for president in 2016, she wore primarily coordinated pantsuits, which has helped to normalize them a great deal.
To be clear, though, that is also the reason she lost the election.
Do you want to say anything more about that?
No, I don't. I just think it would be funny.
Okay.
Like, if someday in the far future, right, like, this is like the main evidence. This is like this podcast document right here, right? is like a primary source, one of the few sources left from like 2024.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, huh.
How
Well,
did Hillary
we've
Clinton
heard about
lose?
this Hillary Clinton person. Why did Hillary Clinton lose? Well, the only primary source we have is that she wore coordinated pantsuits. So that must be the reason she didn't become president.
Yeah, if she'd been wearing the sundress, she would have won. Certainly. So, Mon Mothma, as it happens, rarely seems to wear pants of any kind. In Revenge of the Sith and the Clone Wars, we see her in robe-like ensembles. In Andor, she wears dresses of various kinds. But we have seen her occasionally eschew them for the sake of trousers. In one of last year's Return of the Jedi one-shots, Mon Mothma can be seen wearing an outfit extremely similar to the uniform worn by Leia on Hoth, including snow pants. She also wears pants in Rebels when she's on the run from the Empire. Again, this is probably a practical decision. It makes it significantly easier to do Star Wars when you're not wearing multiple layers of draped fabric. It also makes it so the Rebels animators don't have to render cloth simulations, but that's neither here nor there. The jury is still out on whether or not you should wear jewelry as a politician. Some do, some don't. Some people say they shouldn't, that the choice is gauche. Some women believe that wearing jewelry is a power move, a show of class or wealth. This is probably why pearls are so popular in the field. Mon Mothma isn't a stranger to wearing jewelry in her work. Across different outfits, she wears the Silver Medal of Peace and its related brooches, an ancient Chandrilan headdress in Revenge of the Sith, and various earrings in Andor. But the most notable thing about her jewelry choices is how consistent they are. Aside from her headdress, she exclusively wears some combination of the metal brooches and earrings. And she doesn't wear that many different earrings either. In Andor, she's only got like 4 pairs, which is fewer than I have, and I don't own that many earrings.
I have like 4 pairs of earrings and I don't have my ears pierced. So
Jesus Christ, Mon. Besides, when going to parties, Mon Mothma repeats outfits fairly regularly across her appearances. This is a popular tactic for politicians. Create a uniform of sorts, so your look is consistent. Barack Obama famously pared down his choices to a blue suit or a gray suit. Simple and efficient.
and then was castigated when he eschewed that one time to wear like a tan suit.
I believe the tan suit was before he had the uniform laid out.
Oh, so that's the reason he developed the uniform, is because of how everyone lost their minds over the tan suit.
Perhaps. I mean, if you are a non-white person, you are also going to be under greater scrutiny.
Ah.
Not even to mention non-white women who cannot catch a break in our political system. Okay, but you don't really get to do the uniform thing as a woman. Janet Yellen, then 15th chair of the Federal Reserve, wore a black-on-black outfit with a gold necklace twice, a whole month apart. For this sin, the DC newspaper Roll Call wrote a piece titled, "Somebody Spot Janet Yellen Some New Threads."
That's horrible, but that is also quite a funny title for an article.
The article is like 4 sentences long. It says nothing besides she wore the same outfit, and it's just to dunk on her. What is the point?
Why do you care?
Why do you care? Stop caring. Get a job. Go outside.
I wear like the same like 14 outfits every 2 weeks, basically. Yeah. Like, chill out, dude.
A pretty significant number of women in politics make the decision to keep their hair short. And while I'm sure sometimes it's a genuine personal fashion choice, people who write about this stuff seem to think it's deliberate to appear more professional and less sexy. Vogue writer Nicola Moulton called the short haircut seen on Angela Merkel, Theresa May, and Hillary Clinton the political bob, or the pob. Which is pretty in line with how Mon's hair is cut, right? You wear the political bob to reduce variation in your appearance. You're not vulnerable to an incorrect styling choice or a bad hair day. So hopefully people see you as more legitimate in your role. Hillary Clinton has a pob to keep people focused on her work, and so does Mon Mothma, except that Mon was in the opposition party in the Clone Wars, and Hillary Clinton voted to invade Iraq. Moulton also described the political bob as the thinking woman's haircut. She says it's discreet, non-sexual, and it says woman able to compete in a man's world. You have to downplay the feminine aspects of your appearance for the sake of being taken seriously. This is an idea that is echoed by scholar Francesca Stavrakopoulou, who writes that the implication is that dressing in a more conventionally feminine way is somehow more frivolous and can undermine perceptions of a woman's intellectual and professional skills. A woman who adopts a more feminine style is too preoccupied with pretty things to be a serious academic, because a woman can't be both attractive and intelligent, if indeed she can be intelligent at all.
You know, I know that she's writing that presumably in like a critical feminist context, but that is also something that would just be written in the 1800s by some guy. Like, a woman who adopts a more feminine style is too preoccupied with pretty things to be a serious academic. I don't know. Lord Shrewsbury of Ginglefuck or whatever definitely wrote something like exactly like that.
I mean, these ideas don't come out of nowhere. This idea of feminine appearance as frivolous can trace its roots back to the Great Masculine Renunciation, an Enlightenment-era fashion movement wherein powerful men across the Western world abandoned styles that previously signified wealth and power in favor of more sober shades like blue or brown, humbler fabrics like linen or wool to match newfangled understandings of modesty, of rationality, and of humanism. Fashion became less about ornamentation and more about fit and function, at least for men. Because with this push forward came a push backwards. The ornamentation that had been enjoyed by men and women both was seen as antiquated, anti-intellectual, socially backwards, and unique to womanhood. Women's fashion was held back from similar developments due to a lack of female representation within sartorial roles, and thanks to contemporary standards of modesty, which I do not have time here to even begin to unpack. Within the Great Renunciation was almost this, like, reactionary bent. Women wear high heels and jewelry now? Well, women are gross, and therefore so are jewels. Fashionable men were the hipsters of their day, abandoning their favorite band because they got too popular.
Girls have cooties. Girls have cooties.
Simplicity itself, understatement, was both moralized and gendered.
If you think about how most sort of normal men in this society at least dress, right? Like, what is the standard uniform of like the teenage to 20-year-old man? T-shirts, jean, right? Like, and if you wear anything else, you're an F-slur.
Yeah, you wear the red Millennium Falcon shirt or you're gay.
Pretty much. Versus like young adult women are kind of expected to put on a lot of effort every time they go out to be like acceptable. There is a certain extent to which like simplicity in dress is coded as masculine, where you see like all these kind of, I don't know, mask lesbian thirst traps that everyone's talking about right now, right? A lot of them are wearing t-shirt and jeans or something like that with like a chain, and that's like somehow masculine coded for some reason because it's simple.
Mm-hmm. A distinct memory I have from my childhood was when I was about 8, and a man at my church was talking, I think, to my dad. No shade to my dad. I don't know. My dad was just being polite. And the man like was joking about how long it took women to get ready, and men are so simple. I don't know. It just always rubbed me the wrong way.
That's like one of the most common boomer jokes in our society too, is like, oh, women take so long in the bathroom to get ready. Oh dear. Oh Lord in heaven.
Which, I mean, if you're a woman dating a woman, there's always one of you who goes way longer than the other. And the one of you is me. I'm the problem.
It definitely is you. Yeah, sorry.
Me. Anyway, you can't be too opulent because that's shallow and girly, but you can't really dress down as a woman either. You have to walk what Richard Thompson Ford calls the gossamer thin line between well-dressed and overdone. Quoting Stavrokopoulou again, a male academic can afford to look scruffy if he chooses. No one will question his intellectual or professional authority. Male academics who wear jeans, hoodies, and t-shirts are good blokes to their colleagues. But a female academic who looks similarly casual, or scruffy, or unkempt risks becoming the target of a range of sexist assumptions. She must be a student, or a mother distracted from the job by childcare, or a woman too old to need to bother about her appearance. These assumptions are obviously not isolated. The unspoken dress codes of academia are simply a reflection of the wider policing of women's bodies in other professional contexts in Western society. No matter what their occupation, women are still frequently held to account for their appearance, rather than only their expertise and experience. So a dress code in a setting, even if merely implicit, can reveal a lot about what a particular institution values. If you care enough about clothing to try and regulate or control it, then clearly it carries some kind of significance. What are you trying to promote? What are you trying to discourage? Dress codes perform a function. They exist to harness the expressive power of clothing towards whatever end a group is working for. In 2022, the US Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade.
Whoa.
Leading immediately to restrictions on abortion access and therefore women's health care in many states across the nation. Abortion is criminalized in Idaho, Mississippi, and others.
Home state mentioned.
Yeah, you're real proud of that one.
I am so proud of that. That's my favorite thing my state has ever done. Oh, yep, definitely.
Medically unnecessary restrictions on abortion and reproductive health care exist in states like Pennsylvania or Utah. In early 2024, the Alabama Supreme Court ruled that embryos created via IVF should be protected via the Alabama Wrongful Death of a Minor Act, which, if you know anything about in vitro fertilization, is deeply silly. Embryos created this way are essentially microscopic 8-cell organisms that exist only in a petri dish. They're not kids. Anyway, suffice to say, this ruling wasn't the most popular. And faced with the threat of these affronts to the healthcare of primarily women, many female political leaders who attended the State of the Union address in March of 2024 wore white pantsuits or tops to signal their support for abortion protection. Which makes sense. The State of the Union is a highly televised event, but it's one where you're pretty much just there to see some old guy talk for the better part of an hour.
Or to see Nancy Pelosi rip up the documents one page by one page. Just still my favorite State of the Union address moment.
Yeah, if you're a politician and you have a message you want to broadcast your support for during this evening, it's in appearances. You have to wear it. Congresswomen did something similar in 2017 at a joint address given by Donald Trump to oppose Republican attempts to roll back women's progress. White clothing has been a symbol of women's liberation for over 100 years, when thousands of suffragettes were encouraged to wear the shade to march. The tactic of wearing pure white dresses was chosen as a bold visual counter to the narrative that women who wanted the vote were morally corrupt.
Yeah, well, if you think about it, voting is like giving up your virginity.
Yeah.
Because you're getting fucked by the Democratic Party. Well, more likely the Republican Party, but
you get fucked by one and then you grow disillusioned and you vote for the other and you get fucked by them and you grow disillusioned and yeah.
And you vote for the Party for Socialism and Liberation, the only viable choice to American communism.
Voting is really the ultimate long-term gangbang. Okay, I'm sorry. Jesus Christ. So wearing the same outfit or color or style as your group can be a good way to communicate what you stand for. But on the other hand, when you're signaling a value, you're inherently reinforcing that value's legitimacy and importance. Dress codes can easily further social and cultural hierarchies, or ideas about what certain people, especially marginalized ones, can and should be. Why did suffragettes choose white? To specifically play on ideas about feminine moral goodness. White in certain Western cultures is seen as unblemished and therefore symbolizes goodness. White wedding dresses were popularized in the mid-1800s after Queen Victoria wore one herself. The monthly women's magazine, Gaudy's Ladies Book.
What?
What?
Gaudy's Ladies Book.
Yeah, it's
just such a Victorian.
Yeah, Gaudy is presumably a name, and the book is for ladies.
Oh, I miss the 1800s in some ways. You know that? Like, you could just name shit.
You personally miss the 1800s.
Well, not really, but like, I do miss like the way they named things in the 1800s, because every store was like Jim Bob's, Fergus's, and Harrison's Peat Distillery or something, and then you have like. And then you have like magazines called like the Kansas City Republican or Gaudy's Ladies Book. And I think that's very fun. And I think we should return.
So in Gaudy's Ladies Book wrote that for brides, white is the most fitting hue. It is an emblem of the purity and innocence of girlhood and the unsullied heart she now yields to the chosen one.
Jesus.
White is purity, is innocence, is morality. We might ask why a bride ought to be an innocent girl. Why do we want to symbolize an unsullied heart? What does it mean for a heart to be sullied? Why are we emphasizing girlhood? These are culturally specific values, implying that a woman's role is to be meek, deferent, inexperienced, and virginal. A perfect, pliable prize for her husband. Just gross, you know? I don't know. It's not my favorite.
I'm personally looking forward to being a perfect virginal prize for my husband.
You're not right now, but you'll be born again someday. The suffragettes wearing white were trying to communicate to the larger public that they themselves were of sound moral character, that their judgment was worth including in the political process, which itself may imply that there is a type of person who dresses a certain way who shouldn't be included in the political process.
Yeah, men.
It suggests that if you're not innocent, not pure, if you're a slut, then it's okay not to take you seriously. If you ask me, all people should be included in the democratic process, regardless of their apparent purity or moral fiber. I'm not saying that the suffragettes were wrong to use symbols this way. The fight for liberation is always a messy one. It's an unfair, impossible game you're forced to play as a marginalized person. But you have to choose where you play it and where you don't. And the ways that you play it mean something. Let's go back to the question of character prominence in the films. I want to diverge from the newer media and just focus on the original and prequel trilogies for a moment. These were the films made by George Lucas and are therefore prototypical for all of Star Wars. Leia and Padme are the women who appear the most. They're the respective female leads in their films, so that makes sense. I believe the woman with the next most time on screen is Shmi. Other female characters with speaking roles across the two trilogies include Beru, Mon Mothma, Jocasta Nu, Sabe. I guess we can include Zam Wessel, Nala Se, and a handful of others, but I see them as fairly incidental.
I always kind of forget how prominent Shmi is just because she's only in the one movie, really.
She is in a lot of that movie.
She is in a lot of that movie. Like, the section of that movie that no one likes, to be clear, but...
People love the pod racing stuff. What are you talking about?
Do they? I've always heard that people don't like the pod racing.
I remember back in the day, back when prequel hate was the thing to do, a lot of people saw the pod racing sequence as the only redeemable part of The Phantom Menace.
Interesting.
It's probably my favorite part of it. I really like it.
I like the Gungans battle with the droids. I think that's very fun.
Really?
Uh-huh.
I will say I went to see The Phantom Menace for the anniversary the other week, and some of the slapstick from Jar Jar in that fight got me. Just fully like made me laugh, which I don't think it ever has before, but just like something about that goofy guy just fucking everything up really worked for me. That's good shit. That's good shit. Star Wars should be dumb more often. Anyway, so I'm not going to say that I have counted every single line from a woman in the films. It's much harder for the prequel trilogy. Maybe others are more prominent than I recall. But largely, among these characters I've listed, there are two main categories. People in caregiver roles, like Beru, Shmi, and even Jocasta in Episode 2, and senators for the Galactic Republic. Senator is a role that no other main characters in the films fill, besides Palpatine. The only other good guys in politics in the films is Bail, who's important but isn't exactly the star of the prequels, and I guess Lando technically counts as Baron Administrator of Cloud City. It might seem weird that the role of career politician could be a feminine-coded one in the series. That seems pretty antithetical to a patriarchal system, since obviously to be a politician is to wield and direct political power. If more of the women characters of Star Wars are politicians, doesn't that elevate the position of women within the fiction? In some ways, yeah. It is to Star Wars' tepid credit that its women aren't exclusively relegated to positions as homemakers, wives, or mothers. We have women who participate in the war effort, who make some choices, who stand up in front of the Senate and speak on behalf of justice and democracy. On the other hand, in Star Wars, is politics not something of a caretaker position?
Oh dear. I guess it kind of is, isn't it? All of the quote real work is done by violence and war. Politics never really accomplishes anything in Star Wars.
Politicians in Star Wars are idealistic almost to a fault. Leia's main focus as a leader is put on the abstract concept of hope. While the following two films mostly treat her better, Leia's role in the Battle of Yavin is to stand at a table looking worried, which is pretty similar to Padme's position in the climax of Revenge of the Sith. Besides her own death, of course. Padme is introduced as a queen, but she also falls into something of a motherly role when she meets her future husband. Many such cases. Mon Mothma might technically be one of the most important people in galactic history, but she's irrelevant as hell in Return of the Jedi. She's Basil exposition for 60 seconds, and then she steps aside for Akbar to explain to the audience the actually plot-relevant and exciting part of the plan. She doesn't even get to be present at the end to celebrate their victory. Good politicians in Star Wars are peaceful, while the real dynamics of political change, the change actually highlighted on screen and therefore treated as relevant and worthwhile by the narrative, are enacted through wartime violence. Violence directed and perpetrated by primarily men. Hell, let's go back to the significance of wearing white for a moment. The most famous women's clothing in Star Wars, my second least favorite costume, is Leia's white dress with the buns.
Wait, what is your least favorite costume?
The metal bikini, Sophie.
Oh yeah, that's true. I forgot about that. I try and forget about that.
We're gonna talk about that someday. Anyway, Leia's white dress, it's on all of the merch and toys and parodies. Leia also wears white for a good deal of Empire Strikes Back. And Padme, in her own right, has many white outfits. The dress she wears at the end of The Phantom Menace, as well as a good deal of her costumes in Attack of the Clones, her nightgowns, Tatooine outfit, action getup for the sequence on Geonosis, to say nothing of her actual wedding dress. It's not only women who wear the shade. Luke mostly wears white in A New Hope, but it seems especially prevalent for women, don't you think? Leia in white is the damsel in distress. The first time she's shown on screen, she's hidden in fog and obscured from view. She's more of a goal, a prize, and this is how she appears to Luke in the hologram. Remember, the reason Luke was initially interested in the quest with the droids was because he thought Leia in the hologram was pretty.
Yeah, the entire plot of Star Wars is because Luke has an incest boner for his sister.
Writing about the trope of the paragonal woman in white, Sarah Gailey says, "The woman in white is often used as a main character's motivation. She is his comfort in times of trouble, the source of his courage, and the object of his projection. His journey is one of attempting to become worthy of the woman in white, and all she represents. His reward is her approval, her affection, her respect." And sure, there's some fun in the idea of this powerful woman in white also being portrayed as a bit of a badass. I love Leia a lot. But nonetheless, her clothing in A New Hope seems somewhat dehumanizing to me. Star Wars Woman in White is powerful and virtuous, but also placed on a pedestal to be admired, similarly only to be taken down from it for the audience's enjoyment, like the rending of Padme's clothing in the Petronaki arena. Mon Mothma isn't divorced from this. She's a beacon of guidance in Return of the Jedi, almost an extension of the white conference room she speaks in. We're told through this coordination that Mon Mothma is the Rebel Alliance. And this is kind of desubjectification. She's one of the only women in the movie, but her role is as an idea, a symbol, not a character. And that's not awesome.
We know for a fact that she's like the one running the show, basically, right? And for her to be shown almost as a figurehead by the film's sort of like subtle cues is not either a good reflection of her actual role in the Alliance or good from like a, sexism perspective.
In Rogue One, her dress is in stark contrast with the dark rebel base. She's the ideal that the Alliance is trying to live up to despite its moral precarity. And for all its supposed grit, Andor actually keeps up with this. Every time she's out working, she's wearing white. Every time she visits Luthen, speaks on the Senate floor, sometimes she wears the blue coat over it, but nonetheless, white. It's not just Mon. Star Wars still likes to put its women in white. It's thus far the final evolution of the costumes of Rey and Ahsoka. But as these characters are warrior monks, they're in more of a starring role and get to both make decisions in their narratives and avoid being the prize at the end of the tunnel for our male leads. Both Ahsoka and Rey are characters who are essentially resurrected from the dead. White for these women seems to symbolize more of a spiritual purity, enlightenment. So just because these tropes started off as sketchy doesn't mean they're irredeemable. And I think we can generally attribute Mon's wardrobe to this trend as well. Despite being the textbook Star Wars white-clad politician, she's a subject in Andor, a lead. Her experience and decisions and values are all taken seriously by the narrative. And with that comes a bit of complication. Her silver or gold dresses are none of them white. The first time we'd seen the character on screen avoid the color entirely. But clearly in Star Wars, white has become a symbol of the feminine power of subjects, even if it didn't start that way, which is a step up, I think. Whether or not we can interpret specific institutions as patriarchal in Star Wars isn't always clear. I said that thing about the Empire being staffed by men, and it's deliberate in Andor and occasionally other texts, but Star Wars also likes to pretend its institutions are pretty much egalitarian these days. The appearance of misogyny in our real world is unpopular and unfashionable, and frankly, Star Wars fans don't need any excuse to sideline women more than we already do, so they stick women in where they can. But it's not just the Empire. We can look at Alliance High Command in Rogue One and notice that it's overwhelmingly men. 14-2. The Jedi Council tends to be about 75% men across prequel-era stories, and in the trilogy itself, none of the handful of women on the Council ever get the opportunity to speak, because it's entirely Obi-Wan and Mace Windu. I want Star Wars to more properly represent my gender, but the movies are what they are. The first 6 are the most obviously guilty, but that hasn't changed that much with the newer entries. Star Wars reflects and converses with our cultural values about power and identity and gender. That can't be divorced from the setting. So the Empire, and indeed the Rebellion, are male-dominated in A New Hope, because George Lucas, as a man, had certain ideas about who participated in warfare. That's just a part of it. Women in Star Wars are marginalized. That's a part of it too. When a trilogy is led by a woman, her legitimacy, power, dialogue, performance are all brought into question. When a woman survives a lightsaber wound, she's breaking the setting. When a woman is the only playable in a video game, it's a problem.
There's all these like dumb criticisms of Rey, like, being able to hold her own against Kylo Ren in a lightsaber battle and stuff. I can almost guarantee you that those would either not exist or be much more muted if Rey had been a male character.
Almost certainly.
Everyone would be like, oh my gosh, he's so cool. He's guided by the Force to be able to defeat this super strong evil Sith dude. Versus where it's Rey, it's like, oh, that's so unrealistic. She wouldn't be able to do that.
Right. Mon Mothma is literally a character who is, in the text of Andor, under surveillance. From her first scene, her chauffeur, Cloris, is identified as an ISB plant, put there to determine her threat to the Empire. She checks her every move, she hides her face for her own safety. When she asks for privacy, Cloris still listens via comlink, so he can report his findings to Supervisor Blevin, who answers to Major Partagaz, who probably answers to Yularen, who spoke with Emperor Palpatine last night. This chain of command, this power structure of men, is so insidious that even a woman as rich and powerful as Mon Mothma is constrained by it. I'm speaking metaphorically, of course, because even if you're top dog as a woman, even if you're enmeshed in the most domineering and colonial powers in this world, you're still on unequal footing. You can be up there slashing welfare and doing war crimes just like the men are, just as well as the men are, to benefit the men, and you're still going to get read to filth in the papers for wearing the same scarf as last week, let alone what your coworkers say.
Hey, no need to slander Janet Yellen like that. She hasn't slashed welfare.
I have to emphasize the fact that we're still talking about American politicians a lot of this. Fuck them. Fuck a lot of them.
Well, right. You can be Margaret Thatcher, one of the most unfortunate politicians of the latter half of the 20th century. Destroyed England, basically.
For the benefit of powerful men.
Largely, yes, for the benefit of powerful men, and still get criticized for being too weak because you're a woman. You can say a lot of things about Margaret Thatcher, but she was a very powerful and impactful politician, even if the ways she used that power and impact are seriously not to my liking.
People will always judge others based on their appearance and style. That's kind of the point of fashion, right? Expression and identity. But to simply say it always happens is to ignore the ways in which aesthetic judgment is meted out unequally for specific people in specific roles. For men in politics, unless their clothing is particularly unusual or unkempt, no one thinks about it. No one pays them a single word or a second thought. Perhaps, then, the reason women in politics and their appearances are under such intense scrutiny, the reason why there's no way to win, is because the language of fashion that exists within political life is defined both in opposition to and in absence of women. Women in politics are, in a patriarchal system, out of place. Political style, the way politicians and lawmakers dress, is conceived of as for men, for their bodies, their sensibilities, for their presence. And if you're a woman in a man's role, you're forced to attempt to wear men's clothes. You're a subversion. You're doing drag.
All women politicians are doing drag.
Kinda, yeah. Anyone who's ever tried to break out of gender roles knows that you paradoxically come under fire for both looking too much like the one role and adopting the other. Am I gross to you for being too feminine or for looking like a man? Is the problem that I'm trying to be a woman or that I'm failing? Hell, the word transvestite, as outdated as it is, literally describes a person who transgresses vestimentary conventions, who commits fashion crimes.
Even worse than war crimes, fashion crimes.
Yeah, it's up there. Clothing that denotes power is masculine by design, because to be a man is to deserve power. To be a woman is to lack it. So when you're a woman in a seat of power and you try to dress the part, you're already committing a fashion faux pas in sheer attempt. Mon Mothma leaves the Empire, and she leaves her wealth and beautiful outfits behind. She abandons them for her cause, and with it comes liberation. And pants, and a pair of flats. The Medal of Peace she wears in every other appearance doesn't show up in Andor, but once she's on the run, it comes back. She loses the layers. She ditches the earrings. She cuts the pob. She doesn't look trendy or opulent. She's still working. She's still leading. She looks nice, but she's no longer playing the impossible game with its unspoken rules. While she leads the alliance to bring down the Empire, everything else becomes secondary. All she's got left is a silly white sheet. Until she becomes the Supreme Chancellor after the war, she brings the pob back for that. She's wearing less white, though, so that's interesting.
Maybe a symbolism almost of the Republic being less sexist than the Empire. I don't know.
Possibly.
I've actually written a couple of papers about this topic for school and stuff, and every time I come back to it, it still like blows my mind how silly it all is. I mean, that patriarchy is a thing. Like, why? Given that women are obviously superior.
Yeah. The problem is that it's not a women-dominated society.
But like, it is something I notice in basically every context. Like, and here's one that's gonna rock the mind a little bit, right? Like, we have in the Episcopal Church women priests, right? Because we're normal. And, you know, you have all sorts of clerical shirts these days, like clerical shirt being the shirt with the collar in it, right? You don't always just wear like, you know, the big black long sleeve shirt anymore, like everyone always used to. There's like tank tops now, there's t-shirts with clerical collars, there's basically all sorts of things. Even like I saw one guy who's a priest in Hawaii wearing like a Hawaiian shirt with a collar on it, which I thought was pretty funny.
Oh my God. Cool youth pastor shit.
But you'll see like all of these men wearing like all these different types of clerical shirts without anybody really worrying about it. But like if a woman priest dares to put on like, you know, a tank top clerical shirt, like, oh, she's so immodest, she's dishonoring the church, yada, 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 yada. Things that you'll never hear if a man were to do that. And the same thing goes for like, there's actually two different types of collars that priests will use in the Episcopal Church. There's one that's kind of like, you know, the traditional collar you think of, the little black square in the front. And there's one that's like a full white collar. And what I've noticed is that, so a lot of men use the little tab collars and a lot more women priests will use the sort of bigger white collars, except if they're a bishop or a dean, in which case they always wear, it seems like, the tab collar. They're sort of taking on a more masculine collar. Like, it's wild how this affects literally every aspect of society, even things like that, which you wouldn't think would be like a thing, but it is. It's wild. It's wild. It's all wild.
Right. It seems so arbitrary. Like, but we exist within this system and within this social order.
We exist in the context of all in which
we live in a society.
We didn't just fall out of a coconut tree.
We didn't just fall out of a coconut tree. Really quick here at the end, I want to specifically recommend the book Dress Codes: How the Laws of Fashion Made History by Richard Thompson Ford. I discovered it while doing research for this episode, and what I've read kind of blew my fucking mind. Ford is a black man, so on top of discussions about gendered clothing, he includes a lot of really fantastic history around race and fashion as well, which, while not super relevant to this episode, is absolutely worth your time. He also has a really solid understanding of trans people and our history, and includes our struggles in his arguments. A trigger warning for chapter 14, though, there's a description of transphobic violence that I found really uncomfortable to read. That chapter is quite good, but I would have preferred to know about it beforehand, so if any of you go read the book, just to be aware. Anyway, I highly recommend Dress Code. It might be my favorite thing I've read for the show so far. Additionally, if you head to our website, daughtersofferrix.com, the sources for this episode, episode 20, include a little reference gallery I put together of all of Mon Mothma's different outfits in canon that are known to me. They're listed in loose chronological order. The visual depictions I could find of her from Legends seem to pretty much just replicate her outfits from episodes 3 and 6, so those aren't really included. Give that a look if you want to see some of the outfits I vaguely described here, and you can see just how much white Mon Mothma wears. All right, Sophie. Do you want to read some emails?
I would love to read some emails.
Where can people email us if they want their thoughts read on the show?
You can email us at daughtersferrix@gmail.com.
Our first email is from June. June says, "Hey daughters, my last email was about the Portuguese Carnation Revolution, which just celebrated its 50th anniversary. But this time, I actually have a question about Star Wars. Shocking, I know. I wanted to know what your general feelings were about Luthen, not just as a figure for political change in Andor and Star Wars at large, but also on him as a character in the show, and as a person in the galaxy, and his personal moral code. Personally, I had very mixed and complicated feelings on him as a person and his moral character for the show's duration. I found it very hard for me to separate what I knew from what Luthen couldn't have known, as in knowing that Cassian never once betrayed their operation, or divulged any info on it to anyone, even when he had ample chance to, not to mention his usage of the lies of insurgent fighters as a sacrificial lamb to keep the heat off of him, or one of the main purposes of the heist being to goad the Empire into furthering their oppression across the galaxy so as to spur on further rebellion as a response, but at the cost of the suffering of countless people across the galaxy. I love Luthen as a character and what he brings to the story, and I understand where he comes from. For him, the ends justify the means on this. The old, you can't make an omelet without cracking a few eggs. But I found it very hard to reckon with emotionally, especially being autistic and sensitive to injustice, until the very end, where it at least finally seems like Cassian joined them and won't be hunted by them anymore. In summary, Andor is the best Star Wars media out there, and I love it to death. And Luthen is a very complicated, fascinating man doing some wrong things for the right reason. A problematic king, if you will. From your trans sister across the Atlantic, much love, and may the cunt be with you always.
Luthen. I gotta agree with you. He is a problematic king, but, there's a certain extent to which, right, when you are fighting something that is as evil as the Empire, and, I always thought the Empire was evil, but I never knew it was as evil as I know it is now that I've done this show for a while. I don't know. There's a certain extent to which the ends are always going to justify the means, right? I mean,
always?
I just was about to qualify that. Unless you're purposefully killing civilians or sort of equally horrific things, you have to be willing to do a lot of evil stuff. And I guess I appreciate that he's able to do that because I certainly wouldn't be able to. So,
well, I think political good can be different than moral good. Is Luthen a good person in his soul? I don't know.
Oh, certainly no.
I don't know. I found Luthen really objectionable the first time I watched the show. But, I saw him as this much darker character than I understand him as now. Now I see him as, I don't think his network is chill and good, but especially when contrasting him to someone like Saw, a lot of people see them as equivalent and I just don't. Because a lot of the time, the main difference is that Saw doesn't really care about the results of anything he does, and Luthen is entirely results-oriented. Saw is just about making the Empire hurt any way possible, and Luthen actually has the goal of regime change. Not necessarily regime change, but regime elimination. And I'm sure if you ask Saw, he would say he does too, but very different. I find Luthen really sympathetic. Saw's what's your political ideology, man? And Luthen's I'm a coward. I just want the leftists to work together. And that's who I am. That's my political identity. I do think whether or not he's a good person is fairly divorced from whether or not what he does needs to happen. I think a lot of the time we view social good and personal moral good as being the same. And I think it's a little more complicated than that. In the Force, is Luthen using the light side to, I don't know, maybe, he's trying to do good, but he's also doing it in ways that he sees as self-destructive. Luthen is not an enlightened person. Luthen sees the biggest sacrifice as the sacrifice of his own morality and relationship to goodness. He's under no illusions about what he's doing. And so I see Luthen as much more tragic. I struggle with reading anything in Andor on a character level because we don't know where most of these characters end up. I found Rick's road really open-ended. It didn't wrap up really any of the loose ends. So I don't know. I'm inclined to see him as more of a positive figure than I think even the narrative wants me to see him as.
Social good, moral good, not always the same, unfortunately, and that's, sucks, right?
Yeah, it sucks big time. Doesn't mean you should do...
don't do moral bads.
No. Moral evil. Yeah.
But...
Saw Gerrera, I'm begging you, sir. Oh, thank you for that email, June. It was a really good one. Our next email is from Ren. They say, "Hey daughters, I took a class this past semester about modern East Asian history, and one of the things we spent a couple of classes on was Imperial Japan's ultranationalist crisis in the lead up to World War II. Recently, as the finals brain fry has really set in, I began to draw parallels between it and the rise of authoritarian sentiment in the Galactic Republic during the Clone Wars. I think I'm onto something, but I'd like to get your thoughts on the matter before I go diving down the rabbit hole, only to come up empty-handed for analysis material. Force be with you, Ren."
Oh, one of my favorite things that I know nothing about, well, that's not true, that I don't know that much about is pre-war Japanese politics. And I think one of the key things to remember is that what is pre-war for us and what is pre-war for even the British and the Germans and the Soviets is not pre-war for the Japanese, right? Because the Japanese were fighting continually in China from like 1931 onwards. So like this was not, the kind of 5-year war that we all think of when we think of World War II. Well, 6-year war really, but it was like a 15-year war for them. And so by the time we actually get to what we think of as World War II, like 1939 to 1945, they've already been in the shit for a really long time. And I think that there's something to be said about a war kind of spurring authoritarian sentiment in a country, right? Like even here in the United States, which was at the time one of the, somehow, despite our many horrible things, one of the better countries from like a being not horrible to everyone all the time perspective, right? What happened when we get into the war? Oh, let's put literally all of our Japanese American citizens into concentration camps, right?
The racial characteristic of the international war is
such that it makes you a fascist, especially when it's a total war. World War II was kind of different from all previous wars in that it was a total war. Like the entire society of everyone involved is striving to win this war, and that requires a bit of authoritarianism from the state in order to actually coordinate that, and that can very easily bleed over into other things. And obviously in Japan's case, there's other sentiments and other reasons that Japan was, so ultranationalist, and a lot of that was actually, sort of intentional instrumentalist sort of manipulation of the Japanese identity on the part of Japanese elites. But I do think that played a big role, like having this really, really long and brutal war, like hundreds of thousands of people are dying on both sides, even before the war proper actually started, probably had a lot to do with it, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, I think there's something that metastasizes authoritarian sentiment during drawn-out wartime periods, or really difficult wartime periods. Like, waging war is one of the most the state is exerting violence things that can be done, right? Like, you are pouring economic and manpower into something that only vaguely might benefit the good of your people, like you might be defending yourself.
Well, because the good of a war is not like an actual good. It's not a positive good. It's like a neutral good, right? It's like, we're not going to die. We're not going to have our houses bombed to shit.
Yeah, if you're not doing imperialism, you're just covering your ass, which is not enough to build a healthy country off of, You have to work to come back from that. And so, yeah, I don't know. You have to, if you want to keep up morale, people have to learn a type of ultranationalism a lot of the time. People have to learn sheer support for the state or the war effort or the emperor. And that's clearly something that happens within the Clone Wars. The thing I will tell you, Ren, about drawing parallels between things in Star Wars and things in history is you can learn about as much from the things that don't line up as the things that do. If there are surface level similarities, you can go, well, this teaches us a lot about Star Wars if there's something super different about the real world. And, oh, this teaches us a lot about history if there's something super different in Star Wars. Star Wars is not one-to-one. Star Wars is not educational material. But juxtaposition is not valuable.
Star Wars is not educational material, says the woman with a 20-episode podcast about Star Wars.
It is not an educational podcast. It is an entertainment podcast.
It is, too, an educational podcast.
No, it is not. No, it isn't. We do not do academic work here.
Excuse me, people learned a lot about trains here.
People did. If you sign up to the Patreon, you might learn something about trains. I learned something about trains. Anyway, I would love to hear if you end up coming up with something especially interesting, Ren. Be sure to let us know. Thank you for your email.
Thanks. Who's next?
Our next email is from friend of the show, Christian. Christian says, hello, Ferrex Pod / best friends, parentheses, in a non-parasocial way. Christian was one of our friends who was so kind as to drive from Salt Lake City to Portland with me and my partner alongside Sophie and another friend of ours. Christian is a dear friend. For May the 4th, I took some time to rewatch Andor, perhaps the best Disney Plus show released so far. It got me thinking about imperial bureaucracy and how much of the day-to-day of the Empire was carried out in a boring political way by people very devoted to their jobs. It also reminded me a bit of the ahistorical whitewashing of the Nazi regime and the Holocaust as mostly people just doing their jobs. Dedra Miro or other ISB officials may not have personally murdered any civilians, but their work still helped to commit serious war crimes and crimes against galactic species, humanity. I'd be interested interested to hear from you two about what other parallels the cold bureaucracy of the Empire, as depicted in Andor, have in real life, and what the takeaways are. If this has already been done, forgive me, I'm a bit behind on the pod. Love the show, love you both, again, not parasocially. Keep up the great work. Christian. Love you too, Christian.
Love you too, Christian.
Thank you for emailing.
You're touching on something really interesting there, Christian, because Adolf Eichmann, right? Sometimes called the architect of the Holocaust.
Often, perpetually.
Perpetually, yes. Maybe not correct in being called that, but he is called that. Kind of the definitive work on his trial in Jerusalem in I think it was the 50s, is called The Banality of Evil, or The Banality of Evil, depending on how you pronounce it. It's a really good book. I recommend you read it.
It is a very useful read. Let's just say that.
It's not pleasant, but it is useful. It's a good thing that everyone should read, right? And the reason it's called that is because of how much of that work of the Holocaust was actually just a guy, quote, doing his job, even though he knew it was wrong and it was evil. He just kept doing his job. He was like a logistics guy. He just organized trains and food shipments and how to organize all the things that they stole off of dead bodies. No, you're right. They weren't just doing their jobs, but they also were just doing their job. Their job just happened to be evil, right? And you just get into this mindset when you're doing a job that is evil, that it's normal, right? It reminds me of this scene from The Man in the High Castle, not the book, but the really bad TV show made about the book. One of the main characters kind of gets a flat tire, and this kind of country sheriff, and I don't know if you guys probably never lived in the sort of area that I do, but like I knew the sheriff like personally. So the country sheriff like stops by, helps him change his tire, and then like goes on his way. And as he's leaving, there's this sort of stuff falling from the sky, and the main character asks, "What is that, officer?" And the officer's like, "Oh, they're just burning, the insane and the crippled today."
No.
Like there is a certain extent to which this stuff becomes normal when you're, quote, doing your job and doing the evil shit. I don't know if this is what you were asking at all, but the point being, like, the bureaucracy, the evil stuff is, simultaneously, yeah, people are just doing their job, but their job is evil.
I think that really highlights the fact that a lot of the time people do know. You know what your job is, or the guy you report to, or what the guys who are out in the field doing shit are doing. Like you know it. It's in reports. Like you're not an idiot.
Well, in the book, Eichmann goes out of his way to try and save or like keep alive several Jews who he knows personally because he knows what he's doing is wrong.
Yeah.
And he tries to play this up during his trial as like evidence that he didn't really want to do it, but like, a
key part of the book Victory's Price is that essentially the Emperor, as part of his whack-ass post-imperial contingency plan, the Emperor has been automatically keeping records of every atrocity that everyone is responsible for. And the idea is that everyone at every level of the bureaucracy is guilty of something, even if it's just tolerance. And I don't know what you do as the New Republic with that. I don't know how you try every single one of those people. You probably have to. I don't know how you build a government on top of that. Victory's Price has its own response to that question. In Andor, at the end of episode 7, Cassian is on the beach on Neamos. He's just going to the general store, basically, and some dudes run past, and he kind of jogs out of there because he's like, I don't want to be caught up in this. And a shore trooper sees him, and he walks up, and he's like, you're part of it. And Cassian's like, part of what? Cassian has no idea what's going on here. Cassian's literally just trying to get the greeny pizzos for the lady who's in his hotel room. And the shore trooper's like, tourists don't run. You're running. You're guilty. Cassian gets brutalized as he's arrested, and then he's taken to this trial, this like machine of a trial room where people are just pumped through. Their names are called, they're sentenced, and they're sent off. And Cassian's like, I'm just a tourist. And the lady's like, well, you're charged with this shit. And he's like, I didn't do anything. And she says, take it up with the Emperor. She's deferring her responsibility for her individual choices as this judge, sentencing people to multiple years in a prison system that will kill them.
Basically death.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she's saying, well, it's the Emperor. Sorry, man. There's nothing I can do. It's above my head. And it's like, you're a judge. Your job is to make decisions. The shore trooper, you're a cop. Your job is to figure out who you're supposed to brutalize.
Right. Everyone wants to abrogate their responsibility for atrocities they participate in to the higher authority that, sort of instigated that atrocity, but ultimately they still bear personal responsibility for their part in it.
We all like to defer responsibility. It's more comfortable. We all like to come up with excuses why we can't do more good and why we can't be more involved in the things that we know we should be. But I think we should learn from that it's really easy to do that for the bad shit. And it's really easy to be complicit,
Mm-hmm.
You are not immune to propaganda. You are not immune from the power of a system that is impossibly larger than yourself.
I am.
Except for Sophie, I guess.
Yeah, I'm immune to propaganda. I am the perfect rational actor. So just be aware. Thanks for the email, Christian.
Thank you very, very much, my friend. Our next email is a very kind one from Nicole Page. Nicole says, "Hello, daughters. Greetings from Australia. I recently started listening to the pod after being recommended it by a mutual on Tumblr. Shout out Chip." Hi, Chip. Thank you for recommending us. And it's quickly becoming my favorite. Star Wars and its historical/political influences is something that I love, but don't have many people that I can discuss it with. So finding this podcast is kind of like finding friends I can do that with. Except I'm mostly just listening and enjoying. Well, thank you for participating by emailing in. I've just finished listening to the episode on Christian radicalism and the High Republic, which was super informative as someone who grew up in a non-religious household. Also, every time you said the gays electric, I misheard it as the gays electric, like a gay person, which gave me a laugh, especially at the line, recruit the gays. More like recruit the gays, am I right? This is very funny. I didn't think about it. I'm reading the script where I've written gays as in look, and so I didn't even think about the way it sounds. It's probably not the most insightful thing to email y'all over, but I was mostly just looking for an excuse to show some love and appreciation for you both. By the way, I'll be heading to Japan for Star Wars Celebration next year as well, so I'd be keen for a meetup if you were planning on holding one. It's my first Star Wars Celebration, so I literally have no idea how it works with regards to all that, though. Look forward to hearing more from the pod. May the Force be with you, Nicole.
Well, it's also my first Star Wars celebration or whatever. Convention? Celebration? I don't remember.
Celebration, man.
I like convention better.
No. You're wrong.
I'm looking forward to it as well. I also have basically no idea what to expect, but I hope we'll see you there.
This will be my third Star Wars Celebration. I do think that we'll do something, most likely in the evening or, after hours even. Maybe we'll say, go to a bar, go to a place, maybe there's a part. I don't know. I need to figure out what the situation is because we will be in Tokyo, which I have never been to. So we'll have to kind of feel that out. But yes, I want to make sure that if there are people who enjoy the show who are there, I want to see y'all. I want to say hi. I want to get to talk to you guys. You guys are often a lot more insightful and know more than I do. So I think that would be really fun. We'll keep an eye out and make sure that it is widely broadcasted once we decide the situation with that. Thank you so much for emailing and for all of your kind words, Nicole. Our last email is from Jones Woods. Jones says, "Hello, I greatly enjoyed your latest episode. Star Wars and urbanism are both particular fixations of mine, so hearing them intersect in the form of insightful, enlightening dialogue was exceptionally satisfying. What I have for you isn't so much a correction, but a confirmation." Oh, yes. Towards the end of the episode, you briefly discussed the formation of a gonk droid culture in the Coruscant underworld, proclaiming it canon, in jest. Well, joke or not, it is in Legends.
What?
It's established in the Galactic Phrasebook and Travel Guide that a community of GNK power droids not only developed a distinct spoken language termed Gonkian,
Gonkian,
but also founded a religion known to outsiders as the Cult of the Power Droids. Pairs of roving gonk droids travel door to door soliciting donations for their organization. To what end, it is never specified. This group was considered so controversial and sinister that the travel guide, which is presented as an in-universe text, was prohibited from translating their tongue. I'm uncertain, as information relating to the cult is confined to a single page in the book, if this was the result of general anti-droid bigotry or reasonable concern. Either way, it's entirely feasible that members of the group, seemingly emancipated from whoever previously owned them, were present and active on Coruscant. Aside from the power droids, the travel guide is itself notable as being our only concrete source on the structure and lexicon of many galactic languages, such as Bocce and Jawa. But more significant still, it was authored by Ben Burt, while the in-universe text was written by his Phantom Menace cameo character, E-Ben Q3 Baobab, in one of the many examples of the unparalleled continuity work that defines Star Wars. I didn't know that, Jones. I didn't know that. I've seen this book around. I didn't know it was written by Ben Burt. I didn't know that in-universe, that is so cheeky, and I like that very much, and I'm really glad you told me about that. This wasn't really a question, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity to share one of my favorite tidbits of somewhat obscure Star Wars lore. Thanks for the spectacular episode. Oh my God.
What?
This feels, I know that this has been in a book for probably like 20 years, but I feel like I spoke this into existence. No, I don't know. Another reminder that droids are people. They can create weird, culty missioner religions.
They created Gonk Mormonism.
They created Gonk Mormonism. Oh my God.
Soliciting donations for who knows what purpose. Yeah.
I have my issues with the Mormon church, but they're not the evil Gonk droid cult.
No, they're the evil human cult.
Do you think the cult of the power droids actually does anything sinister, or do you think people are just racist?
Probably both.
Damn. What do you think they do?
I don't know, like siphon power from orphanages. I don't know.
I think they do human sacrifice.
That would be funny.
That's all. That's the idea.
That would be very apropos.
Human sacrifice to what? You know? To themselves? Is it like a
God? Powered God? I don't know.
They are power droids, so it's like the will to power. It's like we believe in our own, like, it's like Satanism. Oh my God.
Gonk Satan.
They're Gonk Satanists.
Gonk Mormonism,
where
Satanism.
It's not Mormonism. It is not about the deity. It is about the idea of self-determination and freedom from subjugation. Satan not as deity, but Satan as an example of a person acting in just rebellion. The power droids believe in their own power. The same sort of prejudice that exists for them exists for Satanists. Here we go. I figured it out. There you go.
Good job, Ellie.
I love Satanists. All right. Thank you for your email, Jones. That was delightful. If you, listener, have any questions, suggestions, or corrections, you can send them to our show email, daughtersferrix@gmail.com.
If you want to listen to new episodes as they release every other Wednesday, you can find us on most places you can listen to podcasts. You can find sources for this episode on our website, daughtersofferrix.com, and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at FerrixPod, FerrixPod.
Thank you to our comrade Joel Miranda for making this episode possible. If you want to support the show, visit patreon.com/daughtersofferrix. I have been Eleanor Mueller. You can find me at The Letter Bomber on most platforms. Sophie, what about you?
You can find my other podcast about trains at @theredline_pod on Twitter. You'll also be able to find me at my secret new project dropping soon. Ooh, spooky.
This episode was written and edited by me, Eleanor Mueller, and co-written by Adia Estes. Our podcast art is by Jill Mueller. Our intro and outro music was arranged by me, with themes by Nicholas Bertel and John Williams. Thanks for listening.
Don't be sexist. That's my warning for the day.
Your warning?
Uh-huh.
Is that a threat?
Yes, it is.